All right, this video is for learning target 7, where we will be using various things that we've learned in the previous 6 targets to solve real-world situations, basically word problems. Now, these aren't the difficult type of word problems. These are basically, here's a formula and it's some plug and chug kind of word problems. So they're pretty straightforward. But our first example gives us that the diameter of an apple is related to its weight. It can be modeled by the formula where D is the diameter, where D equals cube root of 3W's, and that is the weight of the apple. So in part A, it says find the diameter. You're going to be finding D. And they're going to give you that the weight is 6.47. So our first step on this example would be to take the 6.47, if the computer will cooperate with me here. Okay, sorry, I think the computer's cooperating now. Take the 6.47 and plug it in for W into the formula where W was. The finishing of part A will just be calculator work. I'll show you where the cube root button is now. The part B says to find the weight. So you'll be using the same formula, but finding the W this time and using the diameter of 3.2. So the diameter of 3.2 would go where the diameter goes in the formula. So right here. Solving A, again, is just using your calculator. And solving B is actually target 6. Solve an equation. You'll need to cube both sides to get rid of the cube root. And then once you do, the number that you get over here equals 3W. So whatever number it is, you need to solve for W by dividing by 3. So I'll now take the calculator and show you the buttons. For part A, the cube root button is in the math menu. It's option 4. Option 5 is actually the 4th root button, or 5th root button, or even cube root button. But option 4 is the cube root button. So cube root of 3 times 6.47. All of that's still under the cube root, so we're good. The diameter is 2.69. Just to show you while we're here, the 4th root, if you wanted to do the 4th root of 16, you'd hit 4, and then math option 5, and it'll grab that 4 and put it as the 4th root. 4th root of 16, well, we should know that to be 2. We just haven't memorized, but that's how you would type it in. But anyways, in answer A, our diameter is 2.69. .69 inches. The weight in part B, we would need to take our 3.2 and cube it. Probably should have put parentheses around that just to be safe, but that is cubing 3.2. And then we need to take that number, whatever it is, and divide by 3. So divide by 3. The weight of the apple is 10.9 ounces. So pretty straightforward, just plugging in whatever you were given to find the other variable. The next problem is talking about another formula, which I'm going to read the problem, get it set up, and then probably pause the video so I can show the work and then talk about the work, and specifically the buttons in the calculator, because it can be a little tricky on this one. But a women's regulation size basketball is slightly smaller than men's, so the radius can be found, R can be found by the volume of that can be found using the formula 3V divided by, the radius, yes, R can be found by taking this formula, 3V, and dividing it by 4 pi and raising it to 1/3, which is really cube root. So the question asks, how much bigger is the men's basketball than the women's if you know the volume is 455 for the men and 413 for the women? So obviously you would stick those numbers in for V for volume. And at this point, I'm going to pause the video and get the calculator ready and set up. But you should try to find those numbers yourself, and I will demonstrate the mistake that normally happens here to see if you accidentally did that yourself. Okay, I paused the video just to show you the mistake. This is not correct for the men's radius, but it's a common answer that I see. Typing in 3 times 455 divided by 4 pi, all that in parentheses, exponent 1/3. The problem is this is doing the 455 divided by 4. It's not dividing by 4 pi. And it's also not doing the 3 times. Anyways, there's a lot wrong with it. But if you type cube root in, because 1/3 is also cube root of 3 times, it's still only dividing by 4. So the correct way to type it in, or at least one of the correct ways, would be possibly like this. Multiply 3 times 455, hit enter, divide it by 4 pi, but make sure you open a parentheses because you're dividing by both the 4 and the pi. And then that number is what needs to be raised to the 1/3 or put under a cube root, however you want to type it in. The correct radius should have been much smaller and something like 4.77. So I'll go through the same steps with the women's basketball and get its radius and then write them both. And we need to figure out how much bigger the men's is, so do a little subtraction. Pause the video. So as you can see on here, I did 3 times, barely, 3 times 413, then divided by 4 pi, and then raised it to the 1/3. So the radius is 4.62 approximately. And that gives you a men's basketball radius that is slightly about 0.15 inches larger. So ultimately, the answer, how much bigger is the radius? We had to calculate the radius for both and then do a little subtraction, so 0.15. Our last example here is just an example of how two different equations, when you're written one way versus the other way, how they can be helpful. Let's discuss Fahrenheit to Celsius and Celsius to Fahrenheit real quick. The first equation versus the second equation here. If you had that it's, let's just say 32 degrees Fahrenheit. What is Celsius at 32 degrees Fahrenheit? Well, it's 0. Well, if you plug in 32 for F and subtract 32, it's 0 times 5/9. Well, that tells you C is 0. Celsius is 0. In other words, this first equation is better suited to plug in Fahrenheit. If you wanted to convert 100 degrees Fahrenheit to Celsius, then you take 100 for F minus 32 and multiply it by that fraction. What if you wanted to go backwards, like Celsius to Fahrenheit? Well, it would be better to have this equation solved for F instead of solved for C, because if you knew Celsius degrees was 0 degrees, you could plug a 0 in times the fraction and add 32. Well, that'd be freezing, 32 degrees. F is 32. But the two different versions of the same formula, one of them allows you to plug in Fahrenheit easily and the other Celsius easily. So sometimes you have to manipulate the equation you're given simply by multiplying this one by dividing by 5/9 to both sides, and then adding 32 to both sides, and then you get the second equation. Let me just actually show that. What I mean by that is if you had taken and divided by 5/9 to both sides, it's the same thing as multiplying by 9/5 to the C. Dividing by 5/9 is multiplying by 9/5. And then you're left with the F minus 32 because those two fractions cancel, and you just add 32 to both sides, and your F is 9/5 C's plus 32. So it's helpful to rewrite a formula into another version so that you can plug in C instead of F. So two questions here are to find certain lengths and certain masses of fishes, and then also to solve the given equation for the letter M, so that if you had a certain length and another length and another length, you could easily plug in L's. So anyways, I'm going to pause the video, show a little bit of work, and then explain the work. Okay, so there's a lot of work on the screen now, but the first question was to find the approximate mass, find the M, when the fish is 1/2 meter long. So you put a half in for the L. To find that M, you need to divide by 0.46, and then you need to take whatever that number is and cube, because it says cube root of M is equal to that number. So you need to cube both sides. So the M is equal to whatever that is cubed. Well, Let's look at that in the general sense. Every length, whether it's a half a length or a 1 meter long fish or a 2 meter long fish or a 3, whatever it is, that L will have to be divided by 0.46. And then that gives you L divided by 0.46 equals, that'll cancel, cube root of M. So to get your mass, to get to M, you'd need to cube, get rid of your cube root, both sides. In other words, L needs to be divided by 0.46 and cubed to get your M, meaning there's your formula, which would be better suited to plug L's into, like we're being asked to do. Plug a half in. Take your half, divide it by 0.46 and cube it. Take your half, 0.5, just being lazy, that's a half, divide it by 0.46, hit enter, and then cube both sides. That's how much mass a half a meter fish has. 1 meter fish, divide it by 0.46, and then cube it. The mass of a 1 meter fish would be 10.3. But this equation over here is much better suited than plugging in 1 and then dividing by 0.46 and cubing both sides and having to solve each one of these over and over again if you were given the length of a 2 meter fish, then a 3 meter fish. So just like Fahrenheit and Celsius, the first equation here is better suited to plug in Fahrenheit, but the second one's better suited to plug in Celsius. Well, in our previous problem, the first equation we were given was better suited to plug in mass, but if you rewrote the equation solving for M, that equation is better suited for plugging in L, the length. So anyway, a little longer video than I planned, but still under 12 minutes for the day. You can use some time to start working on old assignments or the new Target 7 assignments as well.